Hello, and welcome to the Oral and Serial Method Classical Hebrew course. A little bit about myself and Hebrew. I grew up learning Hebrew for synagogue, etc. Studied in Talmudical Academy in Israel from 1987 through to 1991, followed by a master's degree in Hebrew and Aramaic in London, then went back to Israel for a further few months, then came back to London and did 1 year towards a doctorate, which I then dropped, and I went off to work for a year, and after that I went to art school. So those are my sort of Hebrew-ish credentials. This is going to be a course in classical Hebrew, but unlike any course in the subject that I'm aware of, any modern course anyway, I'm going to be teaching it using an oral method. This is the oral and serial method devised by Manesca, and I'm going to be drawing on a couple of textbooks that followed this method, more or less anyway, followed this method. One is the Hebraische Sprachlere, and this was written in 1870, so before modern Hebrew existed, and it's by Sach, and there we have, if you can see it, our title page. Nice old book. And the other book I'm going to be using is Cohen's Ollendorff for classical Hebrew. So between one and the other, I'm going to use these texts to reconstruct Manesca's original method to teach you classical Hebrew. Now, when we learn classical Hebrew, the very thorny question of pronunciation arises. I myself grew up using the old Anglo-German pronunciation, and that had the accent thrown back on the penult. This is the pronunciation that in one form or another was prevalent right across Ashkenazic Europe before the Holocaust. Interestingly, Israel's national anthem, the Hatikva, relies for its rhythmic structure on the old penult accenting. So even someone who speaks modern Hebrew, where the accent is on the final, they are forced to adopt the old penult accenting when they sing their national anthem to fit the poem, which is by Bialik, to the music. Now, in some communities, particularly those that descended from ancient Babylon, the communities of Iraq and Afghanistan, yet a different pronunciation prevailed, one that has strong affinities to the Ashkenazic in terms of the vowels, but preserving a wider range of consonants, particularly in the gutturals, and a more ancient distinction in the use of the letter Vav, which is still pronounced in Babylon as it was in ancient times, W. And the ancient distinction of T and Th was preserved in Iraq as well. In North Africa and in Sephardic Spain, different pronunciations prevailed, and while the gutturals were preserved, there was a weakening of the distinction in the vowels, and the distinction in vowel length as well was much weakened. In the communities of Arabia, yet different pronunciations prevailed, also with strong affinities with the Ashkenazic pronunciation, the pronunciation of Central Europe. Modern Israeli evolved with a big mess, really. There were big arguments when the state was established, even starting in the 1870s when Jews started to move in and colonize. Big arguments about what pronunciation to use and even what words to use. Committees were set up, there were big arguments, committees were disbanded. In the end, what happened was that a pronunciation developed which is possibly the worst possible pronunciation in terms of historical pronunciation of Hebrew. A weakened range of consonants was adopted, and a weakened range of vowels was adopted. So the weak range of consonants of the Ashkenazim and the weak range of vowels of the Sephardim were adopted in modern Hebrew. And also there is a growing tendency to elide the pronunciation of the letter H. So using modern Hebrew, Israeli, because it really is almost a different language, is not a good idea. The scholar is then, if he or she wishes to adopt a pronunciation where the spelling of the language is going to be clear and where the articulation of the vocalic system is transparent, then a variation of the restored or of the classical pronunciation will be adopted. Interestingly, one of the early committees that was formed in Israel to discuss pronunciation recommended adopting the full range of consonants as was found in biblical times. But this recommendation was ignored. One peculiarity is that in the north of Israel, at the founding of the state, the head of the school system there was adamant that in ancient times in the Galilee there was no distinction between the sound b and v, bet and vet, and he insisted that the letter b would be pronounced b in all circumstances. There's very good evidence for this, historical evidence, that in the Galilee such it was. And so the Jews in Galilee, in the early part of the foundation of the state, instead of saying ha-zevuvim mistovevim misaviv l'chalav halavan, they didn't say that. They said ha-zebubim mistobebim misabib l'chalab halaban. Now what's interesting is that the synagogue that I attend in London, which is the ancient Sephardic Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in the city, this is the pronunciation that's used. And indeed it's the pronunciation that was used by those ancient scholars who transliterated Hebrew into Greek. And so we have Abraham, Abraham, not Avraham, and that's why in your Bible it's Abraham, and that's why in English we say Abraham, because such was one of the ancient pronunciations. So, to cut a long story short, there will be no pleasing everyone, and my pronunciation decisions will doubtless annoy somebody somewhere along the line. Such is life. Anyway, that's my introduction, and I hope you enjoy this course. I'm going to be producing it sporadically. Most of my attention will be on my Latin course and the current French course I'm working on, and also have plans for an ancient Greek course, but that may have to wait a bit on the back burner until I get the Latin and the French out of the way. That's it. Enjoy. Bye.